Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. I don't know why I picked it up. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary trinket, something that could have been tucked away in an old drawer or thrown out long ago. Yet, the moment my fingers brushed against it, a strange chill ran up my spine. It was as if the thing itself had been waiting for me, waiting for someone to find it again. I couldn't explain it, but I knew it had a history. A history that I wasn't supposed to know. It wasn't even much of a thing, not in any conventional sense. Just a small, tarnished metal box. Not much bigger than the palm of my hand. Its surface was rough, the edges worn smooth, like it had been touched by too many hands over too many years. The metal itself seemed cold, colder than it should have been. It felt wrong. Like it shouldn't be here, in my hands, or anywhere near me. The house I was in, the one I had just moved into, was old, over a century old. The kind of house that creaks with every gust of wind, the kind that seems to breathe with you as you settle in for the night. The previous owners had left it to me, along with all the furniture, boxes, and knickknacks inside. But something about this box, it didn't belong. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I tried to shake it off. I told myself it was just an old relic, probably some forgotten heirloom or family memento. Yet, as I ran my fingers over its surface, I couldn't help but feel that it held something more. A secret. A terrible one. The house itself had already been unsettling. The sounds at night, the floorboards that groaned even when no one was walking on them, the doors that creaked open and shut for no reason, these things had made me uneasy from the start. But this box? This was different. This felt like a warning. I wasn't alone in the house. My sister, Emma, had come to stay with me while I settled in. At first, everything seemed fine, but I could tell she was uncomfortable too. She kept glancing around nervously, like she was hearing things, like she was waiting for something to happen. I didn't want to admit it, but I was starting to feel it too. That evening, after I had found the box, the atmosphere in the house shifted. The air felt thicker, almost oppressive. The silence was heavy, pressing in on me from every corner of the room. And then, there were the whispers. At first, I thought I was imagining things. I'd hear them in the dark, barely audible, like voices carried on the wind. Faint murmurs, too low to make out, but unmistakable. I'd turn to Emma, but she would always shake her head, looking confused. She didn't hear anything, and I wondered if I was losing my mind. But that night, after I had placed the box on the table and tried to forget about it, I heard something different. A low scraping sound coming from somewhere behind me. My heart jumped in my chest. I turned, expecting to see nothing, but instead, the air around me seemed to ripple, as though something had moved through it. Emma had been asleep, but I had no idea where she was now. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see her standing there, watching me with a look of concern. But she wasn't there. She had wandered off again, and I felt a pang of unease. The scraping noise persisted. It was coming from the box. I reached out, fingers trembling, and opened it. There was nothing inside. Just dust. And a strange smell, a pungent, rotting stench that made me gag. It was a smell I couldn't place, but what I had felt deep in my gut before. The air was thick with it now, the entire room heavy with its presence. My vision blurred, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone moving in the corner of the room. But it was gone. I shut the box and hurried to find Emma. My mind was racing. I needed to tell her what had happened, but the words seemed to stick in my throat. What would I even say? That I had found a strange object in the house and now I was hearing things? No, she wouldn't believe me. She was already scared enough as it was. When I finally found her, she was standing by the window, staring out into the yard. Her back was to me, and she didn't turn when I called her name. She looked almost empty, like there was something missing from her. "Emma?" I asked, my voice shaky. She turned to face me, her eyes wide, filled with fear. But there was something else there, something unfamiliar. Something wrong. Her lips parted, but it wasn't her voice that came out. "You shouldn't have found it," the voice said, cold and distant. Not Emma's voice. I froze. Don't touch it again," the voice whispered, and Emma collapsed to her knees. I tried to rush to her, but something held me back. It was as though the very air itself was stopping me. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch, reaching out, pulling me into their darkness. "Do you hear it?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "It's calling to you. It's calling us. We shouldn't have come here." Her words were enough to send a shock through me, but as I turned to face the hallway, I felt my blood run cold. The door that led to the attic was open, and I realized, with growing horror, that it had never been opened before. I didn't know what to do. My legs were frozen, my body refusing to obey my commands as I stood there, staring at the open door. It shouldn't have been open. Not after all this time. I had checked it earlier, before Emma had come down to the living room, and the door was closed, just like all the other doors in the house. But now it stood ajar, its darkness spilling out like ink. I wanted to scream, to shout for help, but the words got caught in my throat. The air felt thick, oppressive, and every breath I took seemed to be laced with something foul, something that didn't belong. Emma's voice, though distant and weak, barely registered in my mind. I was too focused on the door, on the sense of something waiting on the other side. "Don't go up there," Emma whispered, her voice trembling as she crawled toward me, her hand shaking. "You don't understand. None of us do." But it was too late. The curiosity, the need to understand what was happening, had already taken root inside me. I couldn't just stand there, not when the attic called out like a siren's song, beckoning me into its shadowed depths. It was the same feeling I had when I first picked up the box. A pull I couldn't resist. I reached for the door, my hand brushing the cold metal knob. It was like touching ice. The instant my fingers wrapped around it, the whispering began. Soft at first. A murmur, a hum, like the wind sifting through trees. But then the voices started to become clearer, distinct, as if they were speaking directly to me. There were no words, not at first, just a steady thrum of emotion, fear, desperation, longing. And then, one word broke through the static. "Help." My heart stopped. I turned to Emma, but she was now on the floor, her eyes wide, staring at the ceiling as if something unseen held her there. She wasn't crying anymore. There was no panic, no fear. Just that same cold emptiness I had seen in her eyes earlier. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The way her mouth moved, silent, almost mechanical, told me all I needed to know. I turned back to the door. I had no choice. The staircase leading up to the attic was narrow, winding, and creaked with every step I took. I could hear it clearly now, the voices, the whispers, growing louder, more distinct with each step. The hairs on my neck stood on end, every instinct in my body telling me to turn back, to leave the house behind. But I couldn't. The pull of whatever lay in that attic was too strong. When I reached the top of the stairs, the air was different. Thicker, colder. The scent of decay was sharper now, overwhelming. It felt like a presence, watching, waiting. I could barely see a thing in the dim light, but I could feel something there, something that should not have been. I stepped into the attic. It was everything I had imagined and more. Dust hung in the air like a veil, the beams overhead creaking with the weight of forgotten years. Boxes were stacked haphazardly in every corner, and old furniture lay discarded, as if abandoned in a hurry. But it was the center of the room that caught my eye. There, lying in the middle of the floor, was another box. But this one was different. It wasn't tarnished or aged like the one I had found downstairs. No, this one was pristine, too pristine. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, smooth and untarnished, like it had just been placed there moments ago. But that wasn't what disturbed me most. It was the mark on the box. A symbol carved deeply into its surface. A symbol I had seen before. The same symbol on the box I had found downstairs. I stepped closer, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers were now a constant hum, filling my mind, drowning out everything else. I couldn't focus on anything except the box. I reached out, hesitated, then opened it. Inside, there was nothing. No treasure, no trinkets, just a small, folded piece of yellow paper. I unfolded it carefully, my fingers trembling, and found only a few words written in uneven handwriting. They will never stop. My blood ran cold. I glanced around the attic, my pulse hammering in my ears. The whispers were growing louder, more insistent. It was as if the house itself was alive, feeding off the fear that now bubbled up inside me. Get out. The voice was Emma's, but distorted. Hello. Get out now. I turned around, but Emma wasn't there anymore. The attic had changed. The shadows had shifted, growing longer, darker, as if something had moved in the corners of the room. And then I saw it. A figure, standing in the far corner. Tall, gaunt, its face hidden in shadow. But I could feel it. Watching me. It didn't move. But its presence was suffocating. The air grew colder still, the temperature dropping to a point where I could see my breath misting in front of me. My body screamed for me to run, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead. The figure stepped forward, the creaking of the floorboards the only sound in the suffocating silence. And then it spoke. You shouldn't have opened it. I couldn't breathe. The whispers crescendoed into a deafening roar in my head. I reached out for the door, but my hand, my entire body, betrayed me. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, trapped by the thing I had unleashed. The figure took another step forward. You don't understand. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The darkness around me thickened, closing in. And as the figure reached out, the air went black. I woke up with a start, gasping for air, my chest heaving. The attic was gone, replaced by the familiarity of my bedroom. The light from the street lamps outside filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. My body was drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs as if I had been thrashing in my sleep. I sat up, wiping my face, trying to steady my breathing. The sensation of the figure, the cold touch of its presence, lingered in the pit of my stomach, gnawing at me. The whispers had followed me, clinging to the edges of my mind, and I could still hear them now, though faintly. A alarm that I could never quite shake off. It was just a dream, I told myself. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. I had felt it, the cold air, the suffocating darkness. That figure. It wasn't just a product of my mind. The sound of the clock ticking in the room seemed deafening now, each second stretching longer than the last. I looked around, my eyes scanning every corner of the room, half expecting to see something or someone lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing. Just the same old room, the same familiar walls. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stood up and walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to see the quiet street below. The night was still, too still. No cars passing, no voices drifting in the air. Just the oppressive silence wrapping around me like a heavy cloak. And yet, the whispers were still there, barely perceptible, like a song from the other side of a thick wall. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to ground myself, trying to make sense of it all. But nothing made sense. I couldn't explain the box, the attic, or the figure. I had never felt so powerless, so helpless. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening to me, to this house. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, dialing Emma's number without thinking. It rang 3 times before her voice finally answered, though it was different. The usual warmth was gone, replaced by eerie emptiness. "Hello?" "Emma," I said, my voice shaky. "Emma, it's me. I don't know what's happening. I saw something. I was in the attic, and..." "What do you mean, the attic?" Her voice cut through the phone, sharp, almost frantic. "There's no attic, remember? We sealed it up after everything." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" "I've been in the attic. I saw the box, the symbol, Emma. I swear I..." "Stop," she interrupted, her tone low, almost pleading. "You shouldn't be talking about it. You shouldn't even be thinking about it. Leave it alone." I could hear the desperation in her voice now, the tremor that had never been there before. Something wasn't right. I knew it. There was something Emma wasn't telling me. Something she was hiding. "Emma, please," I begged, but she was already hanging up. The call ended abruptly, leaving me in the silence of my room, the weight of her words pressing down on me. I had to find out more. I had to understand. I grabbed my jacket and ran out the door. I couldn't wait any longer. I had to go back to the house. The streets were quiet as I made my way through the neighborhood, the usual sounds of the city absent, replaced by an eerie calm. It felt wrong, unnaturally still. Even the air seemed thicker, as though something was pressing down on me. My footsteps echoed loudly on the pavement, amplifying the sense of isolation that gripped me. When I reached the house, the front door stood wide open, as though inviting me in. But the sight of it unsettled me. This wasn't how I had left it. I distinctly remembered locking the door when I left. I should have felt a sense of security, but all I felt now was a growing sense of dread. I stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and dust mingling with something else, something foul. a sharp metallic tang that burned my nostrils. The house felt different, darker. The walls seemed to close in around me, and every creak of the floorboards beneath my feet made my heart race. "Hello?" My voice echoed through the empty house, but there was no answer. Not even the usual hum of the refrigerator or the creak of the house settling. Just silence. I made my way up the stairs, each step feeling heavier than the last. The door to the attic was still there, though it looked wrong. The wood was warped, the metal handle rusted, and there was an unnatural light coming from under the door, casting strange shadows that seemed to twist and writhe on their own. I reached for the doorknob, but my hand froze just before touching it. I couldn't do it. The figure, the whispers, the suffocating darkness, they all flooded back into my mind. The fear paralyzed me, holding me in place. But I couldn't stop now. Whatever was happening, whatever was haunting this house, I had to face it. I had to know the truth. I gripped the handle and twisted it, pushing the door open slowly. The hinges groaned in protest, and a rush of cold air greeted me. The attic beyond was dark, save for a single, flickering light hanging from the ceiling. The smell of decay was stronger now, overwhelming. And there, lying in the center of the room, was the same box. The same symbol. And next to it, a new figure. This time, it wasn't in the shadows. It was standing in front of the box, its shape too familiar. And as it turned to face me, I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't a figure at all. It was me. I stood frozen in the doorway, my body locked in place, my breath shallow and quick. The figure that stood before me, my own reflection, was not me. At least, not entirely. It had my face, my body, but something in its eyes was wrong. Empty. Hollow. It stared at me with an expression that I couldn't read, but I felt it in my bones. It was mocking me. A cold chill spread through my limbs, the air in the attic thick and oppressive. The flickering light above cast grotesque shadows on the walls, as though the room itself was alive, watching me. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence more unnerving than anything I had ever experienced. "Who are you?" I croaked, my voice a strained whisper, barely escaping my throat. But it didn't respond. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, a deep, rhythmic beat that seemed to echo throughout the room. Sweat dripped down my face as I took a shaky step forward. My mind screamed for me to leave, to run far away from whatever this thing was. But my legs moved of their own accord, dragging me closer to the figure. There was no escape. The silence around me was suffocating. It was as if the house had swallowed every sound, every movement, except for the thumping of my own pulse. I took another step. The figure didn't flinch, but I could feel its gaze, intense, as if it were studying me. The box on the floor, the same box I had seen earlier, seemed to beckon me. The symbol etched into the wood seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. A low hum reverberated from it, so faint that it was almost imperceptible, but it was there, a sound that felt like a heartbeat of its own. I couldn't look away from the box. It was pulling me in, and the closer I got, the more the figure seemed to fade into the shadows. It was as if the box had a power, an influence, something that called to me in a language I couldn't understand. My hand reached for the box, trembling, as if it had a life of its own. The moment my fingers brushed against the cool wood, a jolt of energy shot through me, sharp and painful, as if the box had connected to something deep inside my soul. I staggered back, clutching my chest, gasping for air. The figure was gone. For a moment, I thought I had imagined it all. I stood alone in the attic, my heart hammering in my ears, the room eerily silent again. But something was different. The air felt heavier. I felt watched. I forced myself to approach the box again, my mind screaming at me to stop, but my body betraying me, pulling me forward. I knelt beside it, my fingers brushing the intricate symbol carved into the wood. It was faint, almost fading, but there was no mistaking the unsettling energy it radiated. I turned the box over, and my blood ran cold. Etched into the bottom of the box, hidden beneath layers of dust and age, was something I hadn't seen before, a name. My name. Confusion swirled in my mind. How could it have my name? This wasn't possible. My hands shook violently as I traced the letters, the sensation of dread swelling inside me. The name wasn't just written, it was burned into the wood, as if it had been there for years, decades. Why? I wanted to drop the box, to throw it away and run far, far from this place, but the moment I let go of it, I felt a strange pull, like an invisible string tugging at my very being. The box was keeping me here. I couldn't leave. I forced myself to stand, taking a step back from the box. But that was when I saw it. Something in the corner of the attic, hidden in the shadows. A shape crouched low to the floor. I hadn't noticed it before, too consumed by the figure that had been standing before me. But now, in the quiet, in the stillness, it was unmistakable. A face. A face staring out from the darkness. It wasn't my reflection. It was something else. The face was contorted, twisted, its eyes wide and unblinking. The skin was pale, almost gray, and its mouth was stretched into a grotesque grin, showing teeth that were far too sharp, too long. The face was familiar, but not. I couldn't place it, couldn't remember where I had seen it before. But it felt wrong, like a broken memory. I wanted to scream, but the sound lodged itself in my throat, choked off by the overwhelming terror that washed over me. The figure didn't move, but I felt its presence, its gaze boring into me like a vice, tightening around my chest. I took another step back, my legs unsteady, my mind racing. I didn't know what this was, or why it was happening, but I couldn't stay here any longer. I had to leave. But before I could turn to run, the door to the attic slammed shut behind me with a deafening crash. The sound reverberated in my skull, rattling my brain. I spun around, panicking, but the figure was gone. The room was still. Too still. I pulled at the door, my hands trembling, but it wouldn't budge. The air in the room had thickened again, heavy and suffocating. And the whispers, those horrible whispers, were back. Louder now. Closer. The attic was alive. And it wanted something from me. I couldn't breathe. The air had become dense, as if the room itself was pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I pounded against the door, my fists numb from the impact, but it didn't open. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed in my ears, reverberating like a warning, a message from the very walls of the house. The whispers were louder now, soft at first, but growing more distinct, more insistent. It was as though they were coming from inside my head, surrounding me, crawling beneath my skin. Get out. Get out. It's too late. The voice, a low murmur, seemed to come from all directions, but there was no one here. The only thing in the room was me, the box, and that strange face in the corner, which had now vanished, but the feeling of its presence remained, lingering like a shadow that refused to leave. I stumbled back from the door, trying to shake off the feeling that the house was alive, that it was aware of me, watching me. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, and I wiped the sweat from my forehead, but it only seemed to make it worse, the heat in the room stifling. The box. I turned toward it, feeling the pull again. It was still there, still beckoning me, its symbol glowing faintly under the dim light. My fingers twitched at the thought of touching it again, but something inside me screamed to stop. My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't ignore the compulsion, the insistent tug at the back of my mind, as though the box knew something I didn't. I took a step forward, my body moving against my will. Each step felt heavy, like wading through thick mud. The whispers grew louder, their tone rising in urgency. Take it. Open it. Find the truth. The words echoed through my mind over and over again until they became one with the beating of my heart, as if they were a part of me now, a part of the house, the very air that I breathed. I knelt down in front of the box again. This time, I could see it more clearly. The symbol, the strange markings that seemed to move, shifting just at the edge of my vision. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a warning. My breath hitched as I ran my fingers over the engraving, tracing the lines. Suddenly, the wood beneath my fingertips grew cold, unnaturally so. It was as though the box was alive, reacting to my touch, pulling something out of me. No. This is wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. The thought barely registered, a fleeting sense of caution, but it was gone as quickly as it came. My fingers worked on their own now, prying the lid of the box open. The sound of wood scraping against wood sent a jolt of panic through me, but it was too late. Inside the box was nothing but dust. Just dust. I blinked, staring at the empty contents. There was no hidden treasure, no ancient artifact, no eerie letter or forgotten memory. Just dust. But as my eyes focused on it, I noticed something strange. Something moving. A shimmer, barely visible, but unmistakable. The dust wasn't just dust. It was swirling, shifting in a pattern, like a living thing. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to pull my hand away, but it wouldn't move. It felt like the box had locked me in place. My fingers were stuck to the surface of the box, the dust clinging to my skin, creeping up my wrist like cold, dry fingers. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. Not yet. Not yet. You're not ready. The words were distorted, echoing like a broken record, but they came from all directions now. I looked around, my eyes wild with fear. The walls seemed to close in on me, the shadows stretching and twisting unnaturally, growing longer, darker. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick, oppressive, like I was drowning in it. I fought against the panic, against the overwhelming sense that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone in this room. Then, I saw it. In the corner of my vision, something was moving. Something had emerged from the darkness. A figure, shadowed, tall, its form indistinct but unmistakable. It was coming toward me, moving slowly but with purpose. I didn't dare to move, didn't dare to look directly at it, but I could feel its presence. I could feel it breathing down my neck, watching me. The dust in the box began to swirl faster, violently now, rising into the air in a cyclone of fine particles. I tried to jerk my hand free, but it wouldn't move. It was like the box was holding me, trapping me, pulling me deeper into its grip. The figure in the corner of the room stepped forward, and in a flash of moonlight from the small window above, I saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't a person. It was something worse. A face, contorted in agony. Eyes wide and empty, lips twisted into a grotesque grin. But there was no body. Only the face, floating in the shadows, its mouth moving, but no words came out. It was as though it was trying to speak, to scream, but the sound was trapped. Like a trapped soul. No. I didn't mean to. My voice cracked, the words coming out as a broken, desperate sob. I tugged at my hand, but it was useless. The whispers were deafening now, and the room seemed to close in tighter, suffocating me. The face in the shadows lurched forward with unnatural speed, its eyes boring into me, and I felt a pull deep in my chest. The box was calling to me. Its presence, its energy, everything about it felt like it had always been there, waiting for me to open it. Waiting for me to discover it. But now I understood. It wasn't just the box that had been calling me. It was everything. The house, the memories, the curse that bound it all together. And the truth, whatever it was far darker than I could have ever imagined. The face in the shadows grinned wider, its teeth now visible, sharp and elongated, and the room spun as the whispers became a cacophony of voices. The truth was more than I could ever handle. The truth was what had always been here. And now, it was too late to leave. I didn't mean to find it. I had been walking along the forest edge when the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, thin shadows over the leaf-covered ground. The wind carried with it the crisp scent of autumn, the kind that tugs at the soul and whispers of things long forgotten. I wasn't expecting to come across anything out of the ordinary that evening. In fact, I had been hoping for the opposite. Just a walk, some quiet time to clear my mind. But there it was. Half buried in the fallen leaves, something metallic glinted in the fading light. At first, I thought it was a broken piece of old machinery or maybe part of an animal trap. As I crouched down, brushing aside the leaves, I felt a strange unease creep over me. It wasn't just the cold of the autumn air or the rustle of branches overhead. It was something else, a chill that ran down my spine, a feeling I couldn't shake. I reached for the object, fingers brushing against something smooth yet strangely warm, like it had been touched recently, despite the deepening night. It was a small, worn-out box, no bigger than a matchbook, engraved with intricate symbols that seemed to shift slightly under my gaze. I could almost feel the weight of the history it carried, but I couldn't explain why. Something about it felt wrong, unnatural. As I held it, I felt a sudden shift in the air, as if the very world around me had taken a breath and then held it. The wind seemed to die down completely, leaving an oppressive silence that filled my ears. A soft crunch echoed in the distance, too far to be a squirrel or a bird. I stood frozen, my heart thudding in my chest. I should have left it there. But curiosity is a powerful thing. I tucked the box into my jacket pocket and turned to leave, but before I could take more than a few steps, I heard it. A rustling noise. Soft. Almost like the sound of dry leaves shifting beneath footsteps. The kind of noise you might hear if someone was walking just behind you, but when you turned, there was no one there. I paused. I waited. No footsteps. No movement. Just a rustling sound, persistent and close, but coming from where? I glanced around, but the trees stood silent, their shadows stretching like fingers across the ground. My breath caught in my throat as the rustling sound seemed to grow louder, more distinct, now following my every movement. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. There was no one. It was just the wind. The forest had always played tricks on my mind. Still, As I continued my walk back, I couldn't help but feel that I wasn't alone. That something unseen was watching, waiting. That the box I had found was somehow tied to it all. It wasn't until later that night, when I was home and had started to examine the box more closely, that I realized something. I didn't want to know its story. But now, I couldn't unknow it. There was no going back. I didn't sleep that night. The box sat on the old wooden table in my living room, its presence an oppressive weight in the dim glow of my desk lamp. The more I stared at it, the more I felt something creeping beneath the surface, something ancient and restless. I tried to focus on the gentle hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the ticking of the clock on the wall, but all I could hear was the soft rustling sound from outside, like the wind weaving through the trees, or perhaps something else. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I'd heard that rustling again on the walk home. At first, I thought it might have been the wind, a trick of the environment. But then the noise had come from too close, too deliberately. And then, that brief sensation of being watched, unmistakable, like cold fingers running along the back of my neck. I should have ignored it. Left the box in the forest where I found it. But curiosity had always been my downfall. I reached out and ran my fingers over the engravings on the box. The symbols were faint, almost as if they had been etched into the metal over time, worn by the passage of countless years. They looked like no language I had ever seen. There was a strange familiarity to them, though, as if my mind was trying to recall something just out of reach. A sharp crack of thunder echoed outside, and I flinched. The storm had come out of nowhere, thick clouds rolling in to obscure the moonlight, plunging the room into near darkness. I didn't remember hearing any weather warnings earlier that day. The air felt heavier now, pressing in from all sides. I looked up at the windows, expecting to see rain, but the glass remained eerily clear. The storm was coming, but it was as if it had stalled right over my house. I thought about putting the box away, locking it somewhere where I wouldn't be tempted to look at it again. But every time I considered that, something tugged at me, some kind of pull, invisible but insistent. As if the box itself was calling me, begging for my attention. My breath quickened. Suddenly, the rustling noise returned. Only this time, it was inside the house. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the trees. It was closer. It was as if the very walls themselves were alive, breathing with some sinister rhythm. I stood up, heart pounding, and walked toward the source of the sound, half expecting to see something, anything. But the closer I got to the door of my bedroom, the louder the noise became, shuffling footsteps, faint whispers. I reached for the doorknob. And stopped. There, standing just beyond the threshold, was something I couldn't explain. A shadow, blacker than the dark of the night, standing in the corner of the room, motionless, as if it had been waiting for me. I froze, my mind trying to rationalize this sight, but I couldn't. I couldn't even tell if it was human or something else entirely. It was just a shape, a distortion of the shadows that didn't belong. It didn't move, it didn't speak, yet I felt its presence like a cold hand on my chest. And then, without warning, it was gone. I ran to the bedroom, flicked on the light, but found nothing. The room was exactly as I had left it, the bed made, the curtains drawn. Yet the hair on the back of my neck stood up, the oppressive sense of being watched still heavy in the air. My hands trembled as I sat down on the bed, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if the shadow had been real. But that feeling, the feeling of something lurking just beyond my sight, something ready to pounce, that was too vivid, too real. The night stretched on, but no matter how hard I tried, sleep wouldn't come. I kept thinking about the box. Its strange warmth, the pull it seemed to have on me. Why had I brought it home? Why couldn't I let it go? I was beginning to feel like I had opened something I should have left closed, and now it was following me, waiting for something, waiting for me to understand its purpose. The rustling was louder now, and though I knew no one else was there, the sound felt like it was everywhere. The box didn't just sit there anymore. It seemed to breathe with me. With each shallow inhalation, the feeling of dread grew stronger. Was it the box that had done this to me? Or was something else at play? The rain had started, pounding against the windows like frantic hands. And the wind? It was no longer the soothing, whispering gusts of autumn. Now it howled, wailing like some creature in distress. The sounds outside seemed to twist and bend as if the air itself were alive. Something had changed. Something had woken up. I was beginning to question whether I had imagined it all, the shadow, the rustling, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Whatever it was, it had followed me back from the forest, and I had no idea how to stop it. Suddenly, the box rattled. It was subtle at first, like something shifting inside. Then, louder, as if whatever it contained was trying to break free. I gripped it tightly, heart racing. Should I open it? Should I even touch it? The rustling grew louder, more frantic. I didn't know what to do. But I knew one thing, I couldn't leave it there. Not now. Not anymore. And I wasn't sure what that meant for me, or what I was about to face. The night stretched on, thick and unyielding. I had never been one to believe in the supernatural, in ghosts or spirits or things that go bump in the night. But whatever I was feeling now, it wasn't something I could explain away. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something I wasn't prepared to face, something beyond the natural world, beyond reason. The box had stopped rattling, but its presence, its weight, pressed harder on my chest with every passing second. I placed it back on the table, trying to steady my shaking hands. My mind raced, spiraling between rationality and fear. I had to know what was inside it. But I didn't want to. And yet, the box seemed to call to me, pulling me closer with every moment I hesitated. I stood there, staring at it in the dim light, trying to summon the courage to open it. My reflection stared back at me from the polished surface of the wood, pale, wide-eyed, a stranger in my own skin. What was I thinking? I had already crossed a line by bringing it back. I could feel it now, in the air around me. Something had shifted. A heaviness that wasn't there before. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed deeper, more oppressive. I swallowed hard, wiped my palms on my jeans, and approached the box. Before I could open it, the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the distant sound of the wind outside grew louder, more guttural, like it was being distorted through a tunnel. I shuddered, trying to ignore the tightness in my chest. I reached for the box, fingers trembling, and lifted the lid. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the stench hit me. It wasn't the fresh smell of earth or autumn leaves that had been clinging to the air earlier. No, this was something different. It was sharp, pungent, like rotting wood mixed with the metallic scent of rusted iron. A faint, almost sickly sweetness lingered at the edges of it. I recoiled, choking on the smell, and slammed the lid shut. I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning, the walls pressing in. I staggered back, knocking over a chair as I stumbled away from the table. I couldn't even bring myself to look at the box now. The scent lingered in my nose, clinging to the air like a bad memory I couldn't shake. My pulse was erratic. I felt lightheaded. My stomach churned. I had to get out. I needed air. I turned to the door, but as I reached for the handle, something caught my eye. A shadow flitted across the room, quick and unnatural. I spun around, but there was nothing there. Just the stillness of the room, the unsettling quiet. Except now, the rustling was back. It started low, faint, like a distant whispering that I couldn't quite make out. But the longer I stood there, the clearer it became. It was coming from the box. The rustling wasn't just the wind or the trees outside, it was inside the room, inside the box, something moving, shifting, trapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I backed away from the table, tripping over the fallen chair. I stumbled toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest. The shadows outside the windows seemed darker now, moving, almost alive. The wind howled in an eerie chorus, like it was mocking me, taunting me with its constant shifting. I didn't care what was happening. I had to leave. I yanked the door open and ran outside, gasping for breath. The cool night air hit me, but it didn't bring relief. There was something wrong with the world, something that had changed the moment I found that box. The forest loomed before me, silent and imposing, but there was no going back. Not now. The wind picked up again, strong and biting, as if it were pushing me deeper into the woods. I wanted to go anywhere but back to that house, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being pulled in the wrong direction. And then, just as I was about to turn back, I heard it again. The rustling. It wasn't the leaves. It wasn't the wind. It was footsteps. Soft, deliberate. I spun around, but there was no one there. Nothing. I wasn't sure if I had imagined it or if it was something else, something I couldn't see but could still feel. The trees stood motionless, their skeletal branches stretching toward the dark sky, casting long, jagged shadows. Yet the rustling continued, now clearer, now closer. I couldn't see the source, but I could hear it. It was like the sound of something moving quickly, scurrying through the underbrush, a shadow among shadows. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up, a primal fear gnawing at my insides. Was it real? I had no answer. I started walking, my steps quick and uneven, trying to stay calm, trying to outpace the noise. But the more I moved, the closer it seemed to get. The rustling had turned into something more, faint whispers, like voices in the distance, barely audible but unmistakably there. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't alone. Suddenly, the ground shifted beneath my feet. A soft tremor ran through the earth, a pulse, as if the forest itself had exhaled. The trees creaked, the wind howled, and for a moment everything felt wrong. And then I saw it. In the distance, just beyond the tree line, there was a figure. It wasn't clear at first. At first, it was just a silhouette, tall, too tall, standing still, watching me. But as I took a step forward, it began to shift, its form bending unnaturally, as though its very shape was twisting, distorting. I froze, heart in my throat. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. Its movements were erratic, limbs bending at impossible angles. It stepped forward, its silhouette growing clearer in the dim light, but it didn't make a sound. Not a single footfall. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs were frozen, rooted to the spot. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the figure vanished into the darkness. just like the rustling, just like everything else. Gone. I stood there, breathing heavily, trying to process what had just happened. My body trembled, cold sweat running down my neck. Had I imagined it? Or was this something else? I didn't know. But I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had followed me back from the forest, whatever was in that box, was just beginning to reveal itself. And it was only a matter of time before it came for me. I don't remember how long I stood there, frozen in place, staring into the dark where the figure had been. The rustling had stopped, the wind had stilled, and for a brief moment it was as if everything was waiting for something to happen, waiting for me to act. I had no idea what that thing had been. Was it real? Had it really been there, or had my mind finally cracked under the weight of everything I had experienced? I couldn't trust myself. My thoughts felt like they were twisting, unraveling in real time. I didn't move at first. I wanted to run. I wanted to flee. But my body refused to obey, my legs too heavy, too unsteady. The air around me felt thick, pressing against my chest, making it harder to breathe. I had to leave the forest. I had to go back to the house, back to the box. But something told me that I couldn't just walk away, that whatever had followed me from the woods wasn't going to let me forget. The feeling of being watched was still there, just beneath the surface, like the distant hum of electricity. It wasn't over. I turned around, but the moment I did, I heard it again. That faint rustling, so soft it almost seemed like the wind, almost. But it wasn't the wind. It was something moving through the underbrush, careful and deliberate. The whispers were back, low and guttural. Not human. They were close now, too close. My heart thundered in my chest, but I couldn't run. Not yet. I gripped the ground beneath me, taking slow, measured breaths. I needed to be calm. I needed to think. The whispers were getting louder, clearer, as if something were trying to speak to me. But it wasn't the voice of a person. No, it was something else. Something inhuman. The words twisted in my mind, though I couldn't understand them. And then, suddenly, I heard a crack. A limb snapping under pressure. I snapped my head toward the noise. A shape was moving toward me from the trees. This time, there was no mistaking it. It was real. A shadow in the form of something tall, unnatural, moving slowly. The figure's limbs twisted in strange angles as it crawled across the ground. Every movement felt wrong, as if the laws of nature itself didn't apply to this thing. I wanted to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. There was no air in my lungs. My legs refused to move, glued to the earth beneath me as if I was bound by invisible chains. And then I saw its eyes. Two pale, glowing orbs fixed directly on me, and in that moment, I knew I was its prey. I finally found my voice. A high-pitched, breathless gasp tore its way through me. But it was too late. The creature moved faster now, closing the gap between us with impossible speed. Its twisted limbs scraped across the forest floor as it advanced, its body jerking and contorting with unnatural fluidity. I turned and ran. I didn't think about where I was going. I didn't think about anything except getting away. My legs burned as I pushed through the underbrush, branches catching at my clothes, the rough bark scraping against my skin. The whispers were louder now, filling my head, drowning out the world around me. It was all I could hear. All I could feel. I didn't dare look back. The crunching of leaves beneath my feet was all I could focus on as I ran, desperate, frantic. The wind had picked up again, but it didn't bring any relief. If anything, it only added to the tension, the feeling that something was right behind me. Something watching, waiting. I reached the edge of the forest, the trees thinning out, but my escape didn't feel like an escape. I wasn't free. I was still trapped. The whispers didn't stop. The rustling in the trees didn't fade. And then I saw it again. The shadow. It was standing at the edge of the forest, watching me, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. This time, I didn't freeze. I couldn't. I pushed myself harder, sprinting toward the house. My heart felt like it was about to tear out of my chest, my breath ragged and desperate. I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep running. My body was beginning to give out. But the creature wasn't chasing me. No. It was just watching. Waiting. I reached the house in a blur of panic, throwing the door open and slamming it shut behind me. I pressed my back against it, trying to catch my breath, but the house felt no safer than the forest. The weight of the box, of whatever presence had followed me, pressed on my chest harder than ever. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself, trying to clear the fog in my mind. But even with my eyes shut, I could still hear the whispers. Still feel the eyes on me. I couldn't escape it. And then, there was a sound. A soft, almost imperceptible scraping, like nails on wood. I froze. It was coming from inside the house. The sound was faint at first, but as it grew louder, I realized it was coming from behind me. From the table. From the box. The lid had opened. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to turn around, to look, to see if it was real, but my body refused to obey. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but I couldn't. The box was calling to me. I felt it. There was no escaping it now. I didn't move. I couldn't move. The scraping sound came again, louder this time, more deliberate. Nails, fingernails, raking across the inside of the box. The noise was unbearably close, the air thick with the weight of it. It felt as though the house itself was holding its breath, the walls tightening, the floor groaning under the pressure of whatever was happening inside that box. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to see what was there. But I could feel it, feel the pull, the insistence that I turn around and face it. Whatever this was, whatever had been unleashed, it wasn't finished with me. It never would be. My feet were glued to the floor. My heart pounded in my chest like a drum, each beat vibrating through my entire body. My breath was shallow, the cold sweat trickling down my spine. I wanted to scream, to shout, to run, but all I could do was stand there, staring at the box, waiting for the next move. The scratching continued. And then it stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that presses on your ears, the kind that makes you feel like you're sinking, like you're drowning in the stillness. I waited, every muscle in my body tense, my eyes never leaving the box. The longer I stood there, the more I could feel something, watching me. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A weight in the room that hadn't been there before, a presence that was slowly but surely growing stronger. I couldn't just stand here forever. I had to look. I had to know. Slowly, cautiously, I forced myself to turn around. My body felt like it was moving through water, slow and labored, but eventually, I was facing the table. The box was right there, inches from me. My eyes fell to the lid, which had somehow opened just slightly. A gap wide enough to reveal nothing. I breathed a sigh of relief, but only for a moment. The air was too heavy, too thick with something I couldn't explain. I looked closer at the box, at the small sliver of space between the lid and the edge, and that's when I saw it. The tiniest movement, something stirring inside. Not a thing, but a presence. Something was shifting within, like it was trying to get out. I couldn't take it any longer. I stepped forward, almost against my will, and I placed my hands on the box. The wood felt warmer than it should have. The surface was smooth, but there was a vibration beneath it, like the pulse of a heartbeat, subtle but there. I couldn't stop myself. I felt drawn to it. I pulled the lid open, slowly, my breath catching in my throat. And there it was. The thing inside the box was a piece of paper. A crumpled, yellowed piece of paper, its edges frayed, its surface covered in something I couldn't immediately identify. It was odd, not what I had expected at all. I reached for it. The moment my fingers touched the paper, I felt it, like a shock, a wave of cold rushing through me. My muscles spasmed, my breath hitched, and for the briefest second, I felt like I might collapse. But I didn't. I gripped the paper harder, pulling it free from the box. And that's when I saw it. A symbol. Not drawn, not written, but burned into the paper. It was black, jagged, like a burn mark, yet it seemed to shimmer under the light, its edges moving, twisting as if it were alive. I could feel it, the way it called to me, the way it seemed to latch onto my very soul. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was like a magnet, pulling me in, drawing me deeper into its dark mystery. My heart pounded in my chest, my head spinning. I had to understand it, but I knew I shouldn't. The warning bells in my mind screamed at me to let go, to throw the paper away, to leave the house, to escape before whatever had been unleashed completely consumed me. But I couldn't. I looked closer. The symbol was ancient, unlike anything I had ever seen. It seemed to pulse with a life of its own, dark energy swirling around its edges, drawing the light from the room and twisting it into shadow. It felt wrong. All wrong. And then, in the silence of the room, I heard something else. A voice. Not a voice like a person's. No, this was something deeper, something darker, crawling into my mind like an unwanted memory. The voice whispered, low and rasping, "You shouldn't have found it. You never should have looked." I froze. I couldn't move. My body was locked in place, my chest tightening, my skin prickling with cold dread. The voice was inside me now, inside my head, echoing through my thoughts. I had to drop the paper. I had to get rid of it. But it was too late. I could feel the presence of whatever had been waiting inside the box, and now it was here, in the room with me. The air was thick, suffocating, as if the very space around me had changed. The walls felt closer, the shadows stretching unnaturally, creeping toward me. I was not alone. I turned quickly, but the room was empty. Nothing was there. But I could feel it, the pressure, the weight, the way the air seemed to pulse with an unseen force. The rustling began again, faint at first, then louder, coming from the corner of the room. My eyes darted to the shadowed corner, but there was nothing there. Just darkness, like it was holding its breath, waiting. And then I felt it. Something was behind me. I didn't dare turn around. My mind raced, trying to find a way out, a way to escape this madness. But it was everywhere now, The whispers, the rustling, the pressure. A sound like nails on a chalkboard scratched in my ears, and the ground beneath my feet seemed to shudder. Something was reaching out to me, pulling at me, pulling me closer to the very heart of whatever had been hidden inside that box. I felt it. I felt it reaching inside of me, its cold fingers curling around my soul, squeezing tighter until I couldn't breathe. The walls around me closed in, and the whispers grew louder. "You've opened the door now," the voice hissed. "You can't close it." I tried to scream. I tried to run. But the darkness consumed me, the shadows swallowing me whole. And just before everything went black, I heard one last thing. A final whisper. "Welcome to the end." Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.